Thank you. Thanks for coming. I just wanted to say, where's the mountaineer? I've climbed that mountain. Did it twice. I just don't like to talk about it. Thank you for that lovely intro. I also bought a pair of those sandals. I heard that story about Gandhi. I bought a pair of those sandals off eBay. It cost me a fortune. Then I realized there are loads of other people selling them as well. My name is David Buonaguidi. That's how you write it. That's how you say it phonetically. You actually did an extremely good job. That's the first I've ever seen when somebody's done that. I am the co-founder of a company called Unlimited Inc. As we mentioned, my background is predominantly advertising. I've been working in advertising for nearly 35 years. I've worked in small businesses, big agencies. I've set up a couple of little ones as well. And the thing that has always driven me is challenge and challenging the status quo. And I've got to say that advertising is pretty boring at the moment. It's actually been pretty boring for about 20 or 30 years. Not a huge amount of progress. If any of you watch Mad Men, it's pretty much the same model that gets talked about in that TV show. It's still run by white middle-class men, and that's the way it's probably going to be for a while. But the thing that's always inspired me is getting into the business and challenging it and finding better ways of doing it. And Unlimited Inc. is the latest venture that we've sort of come together to undertake, me and two other guys, white middle-class men, obviously. And the idea is to try and work in different ways and try and work with different clients, actually. We're predominantly working with startups because they are much more passionate and much more ambitious than many other brands that we would normally work with. And as you've done half my speech already, we talked about, my talk is about being a driver, not a passenger. And what I mean by that is about you taking, or making the most of the opportunity that you've got and being in control of your own destiny. This still is actually the thing that inspired me most in my life. These are the two guys from the Sex Pistols, and none of you will remember, even know who the Sex Pistols are. Some of you might even remember the show. It was a show that used to go on in the 70s called The Today Show, and it was hosted by a very old-fashioned fuddy-duddy called Bill Grundy. And for some reason, in '76, they invited the Sex Pistols on because the Sex Pistols were probably the antichrist to everything that most people thought was normal and good. And they came on the show, and you should watch it on YouTube. It's absolutely fascinating. But they came on the show, and they, of course, started swearing and started shouting. They called him an old effer because he commented about one of the girls. The guy on the right-hand side there is wearing a T-shirt with a print of some bare boobs. It was chaos, and it's like theatre. It's like watching an explosion happen in slow motion. I remember sitting there as a 12-year-old, and my dad, who's Italian, was sitting there smoking a cigarette, watching it, like literally grinding his teeth into powder, while these dirty upstarts were just messing around and kind of dismantling everything that he thought was good and normal. And I was sitting there on the sides, jumping around, thinking, no, this is the most exciting thing I've ever seen. I had no idea what they did, and I think I even liked punk at the time, but I loved the fact that somebody was challenging and having a fight with authority. The fascinating thing, well, the thing I find fascinating about this is that the swearing and the bare boobs is actually quite commonplace on TV now. The one thing that's most offensive is cigarettes, and in those days you could smoke on anything. You could smoke on TV all the time. Anyway, the thing that's fascinating about England or the UK at the time, and the reason that I think punk exploded so massively was because there was a huge amount of unrest among the youth, which is something that I think goes through lots of generations. That's what you're meant to be. You're meant to be restless. But at the time, the government and the country was in a real mess. I remember there was a rubbish strike at the time. I also remember there used to be electric strikes. So at night, at about 9 o'clock, you would get a message would go out, and the electric would just get turned off, and you would be sitting there with candlelight, playing cards with your family, which is great. God, the days before the internet. And so you had, a mess of a country. You had a sort of civil unrest coming from the youth. You also had the wonderful collision of creativity. So it came through from art, from music, and from fashion. So the people that were kind of most prominent in that era, people like Vivienne Westwood, were involved in the fashion side of punk. and her partner at the time, Malcolm McLaren, was the manager of the Sex Pistols, and they just created this perfect storm scenario. Also, the following year, there was the Queen's Silver Jubilee in '77, and of course, that was another thing to have a pop at. So they brought out a song called God Save the Queen, which I think went to #1, even though it was banned, and it was just a brilliant, brilliant time to be part of culture and society and watch this thing unravel. And again, as a 12-year-old, I was massively influenced. I don't know if I liked the music or I liked what they were doing, but I found the whole concept of this challenge really exciting. Now, when you walk into a record shop, there are millions and millions, or you walk into a record shop, show my age, but you go online, you go onto Spotify, you go onto iTunes, you see there are billions of different musical genres that I think were all sparked by this one moment that happened on TV, because before that happened, you would walk into Our Price, which was a crappy little record shop in those days, and it had one side was classical, the other side was pop, and that was it. Whereas now, you've just got a multitude of different expressions that you can dive into. And it's it was a great example of creativity and self-expression taking control, and I absolutely loved every moment of it. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that we talk about values, and we've had a couple of brilliant talks this evening where people are talking about what drives them and the values. And this is something I lifted off a very good talk that a guy did in the States called John Doerr, and he breaks the world into two categories. There's mercenary and missionary. I think we all know who that is, and this is Anita Roddick, who was the founder of The Body Shop. And when you look at the criteria for missionary and mercenary, you'll see that there's sort of some of them are kind of quite close to each other. You know, think opportunistically and think strategically, I think are kind of sort of the same sort of thing. But as you go down the list, it starts to become more apparent. And when you look at things on the mercenary side, which is about, as an example, focusing on their competitors, it's a very male response, whereas the missionary will focus on customers and values. This is where the world is changing. It's shifting from being that male, paternal world into something that's a little bit softer and a little bit more interesting and much more values-driven. Mercenary is about being bosses. That's weird. So I'll just leave now. They're bosses of wolf packs, whereas missionary are much more about mentoring and kind of building teams. Mercenaries are obsessed by entitlements, whereas missionaries are obsessed by contribution. And the final one, which is really interesting, I think money is a big thing that we sort of needs to be talked about. I have no idea what any of you guys are studying now and what any of you guys are going to go into business and do, but money is a really important part of it because you've got to pay the rent and eat. But these guys are motivated by the lust for making lots of money. It's about building an empire, whereas these guys, while recognizing the importance of money, are fundamentally driven by the desire to make meaning. I think that's really important. Now, I'd like to suggest that all the people in this room are probably sitting comfortably on that side. Now, one of the issues you're going to have is when you start work for somebody else, you won't immediately jump out and set up your own business. You're going to have to work somewhere else. You will probably find yourself working in an environment like this, and that's going to be a real challenge. One of the previous speakers talked about being happy and being sort of fulfilled in what you do. Now, sometimes you won't get the opportunity. You've got to get a job, and if you find yourself working in a place like that, it's going to be very difficult to square that up with yourself, that I have to do some horrible stuff in order to get paid. Now, I would make sure that you use that as a motivation to go and do what really makes you happy. We come on to happiness. Happiness is the most important thing in your life. It's one, I was talking to somebody earlier about it. When I hit 50, I'd been 14 years running my last company. We'd started it off in my kitchen with 2 people, and I hit 50, and it had about 300 people in it, and I hated every moment of it. And because I was the founder, I thought, oh, that's it, I have to work here until I die, or till I retire, whichever one comes first. And I sat there and thought, I really don't want to do this anymore. I don't feel any happiness or any joy in doing what I'm doing. So I left, which was a catastrophic disaster because I left and then they sold it 2 years later for a load of money, and I didn't really make that much. But the most important thing at the time for me was being in control and not being miserable. And your happiness is the one thing that you're in control of. If you're in a relationship with somebody and you don't like what they do or how they behave, you make a decision not to go out with them anymore. You choose to stop that relationship. I think you have the same power and the same control in your life, in your career, is to stop doing things that you don't want to do and make sure that you search. The pursuit of your happiness is vital. Standing for something is also really important. When we go back to some of those values, standing for something is something that will sit at the core of everything that you do. You know, we're not just these empty vessels that just choose to apply ourselves to do a job. This is something very personal. When you do your job, it is very personal. When I left my old business, I hit 50, but it was because I realized that I had fewer years ahead of me than I had behind me. And that was it's a morbid thought, but we're all going to die. None of us get out of this alive. We are all going to die. And so you want to make sure that you use the time that you've got in your career or in your life to maximize your joy and your fun. And standing for something or having values that you abide by, that you then work with other people to spread as well, I think are really, really valuable. As Ken said, I was the co-founder of an agency in the 90s called St. Luke's that was a cooperative. It was also one of the first agencies that didn't have the name of the 5 white men that owned it. It was called St. Luke's because there were 35 of us. We came out of another business that was sold, and we decided to do something different. And so we created a cooperative. It was an equal share. It was equal share ownership. Everybody from Rose the cleaner, who was this 65-year-old Jamaican woman, all the way up to Andy, who was the CEO. Even though they got paid different salaries because they had different jobs, we were all equal shareholders. And it created a huge amount of great culture and a great bond between all of the people when we first started it. However, 2 years in, when we decided to reissue all the shares and the agency had grown by 25%, suddenly there were people who first time around were quite happy to get given shares, suddenly went, hold on a second, that person's only been here 6 months. Why did they get the same shares as me? And it kind of all collapsed under itself. But the idea of doing something that was pure and clean and honest was very, very powerful at the time. I also set up another agency called Karma, and the founding principle there was never to enter creative awards, because if any of you want to get into advertising, but creative awards is a very powerful, potent reason for existing in advertising. It doesn't really have an awful lot to do with any client's success. But we said no to creative awards, and we also had a very strict no wanker policy, which was just don't let, am I allowed to say that? I've said it. But, not to let any people into the business that were going to bring foreign agendas or ego that was going to disrupt the happy party and the team effort that we were trying to create. And so I think, absolutely, whether you work for yourself or you work for somebody else, you have a right to find those values and then make it public and make it powerful. And righting a wrong is the next level of that. What's the mission at the end of it? I don't know if you know of a brand called Warby Parker, who make glasses, lenses, and stuff like that. They make glasses, and you can buy the frames for $99, which is probably the cheapest you can buy a frame. Everybody else will sell them for $300 or $400. They not only sell them to you for $99, but they also give somebody else around the world who hasn't got glasses a pair of glasses, which is a lovely thing. So they're selling to them cheap, and then there's also the extra bonus that somebody else gets a pair of bins that are going to really help them out. Tom's shoes, as an example. You buy his nice shoes, somebody else around the world gets a pair of shoes, somebody who hasn't got a pair of shoes. When we go back to that analogy of all the richest people in the world have got the same amount of wealth as 50% of the poorest, it's kind of very unbalanced. And I think your values, the values that I think you are genetically programmed to have now, are going to be very, very relevant to a huge amount of people that you can have an effect on. So righting a wrong is a really powerful thing. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on about diversity. We've got a lot of stuff in business right now, which is about the gender pay gap, which is unbelievable. I still can't understand why nobody's addressed that. It's very simple. You get everybody in a room who makes the decisions, and you say, we either stop it or we carry on doing it, but stop talking about it. Start paying women the same price as the same salary as men, and it's over. But we live in a cut and paste social bullshit world where sometimes just having you saying it's a bad thing is actually better than doing something about it. And again, I would stress with you guys that you are going to be leading industry in a very, very short space of time. So have something in your pocket that is going to make an impact, not only on your life and your happiness, but the happiness of others. And I think when you start to do all that kind of stuff, you start to create noise. And when you create noise, it's an amazing thing. Most businesses have become these sort of bland vanilla factories that just churn out beige all day long because they know it's risk-free and kind of good enough. I think, personally, I don't think that's good enough. I like to try and do something that's going to make my life more interesting, is going to be a better service for my clients, and is also going to be a way of attracting fantastic talent that's going to make my business even better and more interesting for me and my other people. When you're noisy, you put a flag up that basically says you're different. And there are billions of other people who want that. There are billions of people out there who want to be involved in something different because it excites them. And when you've got 99% of the choice out there is really dull and boring, it's very difficult to get excited about that. You go into it, you get educated, you have all these dreams about having this wonderful career, and then you find yourself in a job that's really boring and uninspiring and unfulfilling. Now, when you're noisy and you create interesting culture, it'll attract other interesting people who will make a big difference and then propagate that as well. And it's also great fun. When you're noisy, burning bridges is one of the best feelings. Absolutely wonderful. Not actually burning bridges, because that's illegal. But burning metaphoric bridges is really great fun. And then we talked about money. I went to, because we do a lot of work with startups, we go to a lot of conferences where we meet people with interesting business ideas. And I met this young guy who talked to me about, I said, what are you up to? And he said, I'm doing this thing. Oh, it's a really good idea. And he then rolled out this kind of sheet of moments in time. In 2 years' time, we'll have raised this much money and we're going to do this. And then 3 years' time, we'll do this. And in 5 years' time, I've got my exit strategy. And I was like, wow, you haven't even done anything yet. And you've already worked out your exit strategy. So he's lying in bed, looking up at the ceiling, thinking about how much money he's going to make from something he hasn't done yet. And I choked him out. I wanted to choke him out, I didn't do it. But it kind of really annoyed me because I sat and I thought, he's absolutely become what this society has created. We've created a world where you watch Big Brother, you see all these stupid programs with idiots running, no marks, running around who are famous for doing very little. And so suddenly, I've got 2 kids who think that, they say, what do you want to do? I just want to have loads of money and be famous. For what? I have no idea. Just want to be famous. Because that's the world that we've created. And this guy is in business and he's still talking about making loads of money out of something he hasn't even done yet. And there was a previous conversation about money in one of the talks tonight. I think money, again, is extraordinarily valuable. You should never underestimate how powerful it is for stuff that you can do with it. But there is more to life than having money. If you're happy and you feel fulfilled and you're doing what you want to do and you're working with people that you want to be with, not saying go without money, because you're not a charity, but it's like the money will come. It certainly happened with a previous agency, the Karmarama, where we just did our own thing. I didn't care what anybody else thought we should be doing, didn't care about what anybody else was doing. We just did what we thought was right. We acquired a whole bunch of people who wanted to come and be part of that. And then suddenly, it started to work because clients were excited about that, members of staff were excited about that, and people got excited about that. And you build a brand and a culture that is valuable. And that's sometimes where the money can come. If you decide to check out, you can do that. But you can pay yourself properly, because if clients want to come and work with you more than a boring company, you'll make money. So it's good, it's fine. Money is okay, it's not dirty, but just don't make it your primary objective. And I think it's down to ultimately what your legacy is going to be. You know, I said earlier that I hit 50. I thought, Christ, I'm running out of time. What am I going to do with the last, I don't know, how long is it going to be before I start embarrassing myself and standing outside Lidl, nodding my head, talking about I used to work in advertising? And I don't know if it could be 10 years, it could be 30 years, but it's going to happen. And so my thing is like, well, then you've got to think about kind of, what am I leaving behind? I have a sort of, it could be my business, it could be my family, like that guy I was talking about earlier. I think I've got this theory that it's like when you go to the toilet run at somebody's house, that you always think, if it's somebody that you like, that you care about, you always think, I should leave it as nice as it was when I arrived. Because it would be downright rude to make it worse. But the problem is, obviously, you're going to the toilet, so there's a chance that that could happen. One of the things that I like to try and do is, how do you make it 10% better than it was when you arrived? Now, that might just be you put the soap back in the dish, you draw the curtain, or you open the curtain, whatever it might be, but something that is different. That is, maybe it's an OCD thing I've got, which is I want to go in there and make a difference that's more positive than it was when I arrived. And I think that's the same as your legacy. Your legacy has to be positive. It has to be something that when you finish, that there are people who will respond to that and they will take it on and then make it better. And I think that's one of the only roles that we have, whether it's in business or in life. It has to be enjoyable and it has to be fun. And so my thing for you guys is just, like I said, I don't know what kind of businesses you're going to go into. I don't know what you're studying here. But it's about making sure that you make the most of the opportunity that you've got, make the most of your life. I was talking to somebody earlier about life is a bit like a tube of Pringles. The first third we smash down in clumps of 5 or 6 because you think the tube's really, it's endless. When you've got a big fat hand like I have and you get to a third of the way from the bottom, you're like, ooh, I need to relish these a little bit more. And you take them out one at a time and you nibble them. Now I'm at the bottom where it's all the bits. And I leave them on my tongue and I let them melt. But it is about you making sure that you make the most of the chance. And if I knew now what I know now at 53, when I was 20, I think I would have made some incredibly different decisions in my career, in my life, that I think could have created a different me. I don't know, but it could have made a more interesting me. I'm not sure. But I think it's just being aware of the short time that you've got, filling your dash in the most interesting way and making it sure it's positive. And so my final sort of thought was now go off and be incredible and do some incredible things. I think the mountaineer, I think you know that you need to climb that mountain. It's a lot easier than I thought. But I think you have to go off and do it. Thank you very much.